Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, where laypersons and pastors gather every week at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time from wherever we may be to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. This Sunday is November 19th, and we're working to be faithful to Lectionary Year A. Here's how it works. We prepare independently in advance of the discussion after receiving some formative questions from the week's leader, and then in this podcast we share, question, and challenge each other. And this week, with our friend John Debevoise, the senior pastor of Palmacia Presbyterian Church, our guest, but also Palmacia is the producer of this program. They make this possible, so it's a special treat to have John with us today as Bill Hull travels, and we look forward to having Bill Hull back in the near future. More on all that in a moment, but first, here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
I'm John Debevoise.
Sarah Mickelson in Tampa.
I'm Don Upton. I'm in Washington, D.C. today, and our leader for this discussion is Sarah Mickelson, and she's going to set up the scripture reading for us and lead us through some formative questions. Hello, my friend. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. I'm on the mend, I should say. I've been fighting cold. We are continuing our study in the book of Matthew, looking at Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30, moving us toward a conversation that we'll have likely next week, if we're lucky, about sheep and goats. So here we are with Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. And John is going to start us off by reading the half of the passage, and I'm going to finish it by reading the back half. So, John, here it is to you.
For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. At once, the one who had received the 5 talents went off and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.
And his master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And then to the one who had received 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you? I lost my place. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and I gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have at least received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from them who have nothing, even what they have will be taken. For as for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What a difficult reading. Have you ever been a person who chose not to take action because you were afraid. That's one of my thoughts this week as I was reading this. I am related to and have on occasion been a timid person. I know that will surprise some of you. But I have on occasion been reticent to take action because I was fearful that I would choose poorly. So my questions this week stem into that kind of thinking. And this is my first question, and I'm coming to Don Upton with this. What is a talent in this story, and what might that talent mean in today's terms? And is it only a wage? Don, what do you think?
Well, thank you for bringing up running away or not participating. The word I use for it is evasion, and I think evasion is in everyone's heart. And because of what I get to do for a living, it's something we have to address with each other, no matter what the challenge is. The desire to stand down or escape is in all of us. It's a beginning. It's a confession or admission that sometimes I find is helpful for all of us to make to each other. So I think the talent in this case is directly connected to imagination. Imagination, like if you say to a child, let's say in the third grade, I have a bottle of vinegar. What is this? It's a bottle of vinegar. What did it cost? Well, I think you paid 69 cents for it. What is it tomorrow? It's a bottle of vinegar. And if you say to a fourth grader or a third grader, what is this? And they say well, it's a box of baking soda. What is it? They go, well, it costs $1.50. And what will it be tomorrow? A bottle of baking soda. Even the child will go, yes, but it's also a volcano. It's a volcano. It's magma. They have the imagination to know. You put the chemistry together. So I think it's about imagination in three parts. The first is the present state of something. So in this case, it's the talent. It has a value. It's a fixed object, and it's seated in time. And if you don't touch it, it is what it is. And I think the beginning is to start thinking about a seated object that has nothing to do with a human being. There's no human being in it. It's creation of God, but it is what it is, what it is. The rock on top of the mountain has been there 1,000,000 years, and it will be there in another 1,000,000 years. Why isn't it at the bottom? Because you didn't have the imagination to push it down the hill and use gravity. The second part is the physics lesson in this, and I think it works for everybody as you apply friction, electricity, tension, theory of capital, and the investment to it. You apply force to something, and the change can take place. And I think there we are, and the earth and its science all is in here as well. What is this? It's a coin. What's it tomorrow? It's a coin. Maybe not. And the recent, I guess in the last 2 weeks, we read the story of the denarius in the temple. What is this? Well, it was mined. It probably was silver, and it was in the earth, and it was transformed to become that. So this is a God of change, a God of transformation, a God of possibilities. So in its present state, and here's the imagination, it's actually not recognizable of what it could be. In this case, we're dealing with economics and the ripple effect of investment. But what is it today, and what can it be tomorrow? And I think there's a real promise in this, that if we understand that everything in the earth, all things are created by God, that goes along with the potentiality of what a human being can do when they touch something. If a human being uses their imagination, if we recognize that we are stewards, it's not at all what it appeared to be. So I'd wrap up by going, a bottle of ink. Let's say it's 400 years ago. A bottle of ink. What is that worth? It's worth tuppence. What is this? It's a quill. What is that? Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare. Those two things have nothing to do with the joy I have in reading Twelfth Night. Nothing at all. What is this? This is a dictionary. What is that? That is a novel. What is the relationship between the two things? What is this, teacher, Jesus? These are the scriptures. These are the promises of God. What is it now? I will make all things new. That's what I've got there.
Oh, good thinking, Don. I also like the idea that pen and ink can be put to paper and bring you feelings and love words from afar.
So big, yeah.
I'm thinking about that. John, what are your thoughts about this? What is the talent in this story, and what might it mean what might a talent mean in today's terms? And is it only a wage?
It's a multi-layered moment in terms of words on paper or words on scroll or papyrus, either one, isn't it? It's interesting to think about. When Jesus tells the story, a word is used. Jesus said something after being in the temple and before the Last Supper here. This is where this text comes from. He's entered Jerusalem. He's been in the temple teaching. He's received questions from the Pharisees and the priests and the scribes. And now he's outside of that. He's talking to his disciples. And they're headed towards, in Matthew's memory of Jesus, the Last Supper and the crucifixion, and then, of course, the resurrection. So it's like a Tuesday story in Holy Week. And Matthew remembers this. And it's one of three parables here that he tells all about waiting at this point. The bridesmaids from last week, the talents, and the sheep and the goats ahead of us. So Matthew remembers that. So that's one movement of the word, talent, from whatever Jesus said to what Matthew remembers. And Matthew records it, and then that's translated. And there's a third movement from what Matthew wrote to what gets translated into English. So I think when Jesus tells the story, if you can deduce that from what Matthew wrote that's been translated into English, he meant an economic term. But I think, and so it comes out with the word talent. It's interesting to see over time how language scholars vary on translating the financial amount of this. I think it's about recalculating for today's inflation and interest about $10,000, but it looks to me like scholars have varied from $1,000 to $50,000 in terms of the value of a talent, which is just to say it's not easy to calculate a sum of money, from 2,023 years ago and get it into whatever the modern equivalent would be, given interest rates and things like that. But I think it's a financial sum, and I think it's meant to represent a lot. That one talent, it wasn't like he gave him $1, and told him to bury it. It's a significant, even the one talent is a significant sum of money. But even when the story is told and then written down, I think that use of an economic specific amount of money, a wage, was, and it's in English, because the word gets translated into talent, readers hearing it, English readers, it's not uncommon for them to think that the text is talking about some specific ability or creative gift. And that's not what's said in the text. That's a mishearing of what they meant using the word talent as an old English description of this economic term. But I do think that expansion of the possibility in talent that Don illustrated so beautifully with, Marlowe's text and pen and Shakespeare's Twelfth Night coming from pen to work, that's what the story is meant to evoke. I don't think that this parable is just about what we do with a financial sum. I think the parable is meant to look at our stewardship of all things that come under our stewardship, each minute in the day that we live. But I think, though, at the tail end of this, then, we have a tendency in Western first world countries, and maybe particularly in Christian community in Western first world countries, to say, oh, this isn't really about money. This is about all of our gifts. And so there's kind of a denial there. No, it comes back to it. No, this is about money as well as all of our different gifts. And that's true too, isn't it? That it's not just about our creative gifts, but it's also about the funds that we're responsible for.
That's what I was thinking too. that this is more than, I mean, the language I read was a talent would be equivalent to the lifetime amount of money a person would be paid. If a denarius was a daily wage, then a talent would be an annual volume of money.
It's a lot.
Yeah, which for me is a considerable amount of money for anyone, and then to multiply that in the denominations that this particular parable gives us. And I agree with you. I think it gets to that place where it's more money than I can imagine. And I thought about talents also being opportunity to engage, opportunity to make something into something more. I mean, this weekend a conversation was had. We wrapped up our stewardship campaign at church, and one of the conversations we had was that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, because people working together dynamically shift a picture or take action and are able to bring to bear imagination, strength, determination, all of those things, and can do something more significant together than they could as individuals. So I'm thinking about a lifetime of opportunity. I'm thinking about engagements as far as the relationships that are struck with people. We build relationships to do something. I'm thinking about wages. I'm thinking about imagination. I'm thinking about all those things that are a part of the story when it comes to what it looks like in terms of talents. I'm going to come back to the idea of fear eventually. But question number 2, since the talents might be a lifetime of opportunity, engagement, wages, and since these talents truly belong to the giver and are gifted or surrendered to each receiver, what does this parable tell us about the relationship between the giver and the receiver? What do you think, John?
I think that's a great question. Do we think, I'm going to restate it, can we peer back through our hearing the English translation, from the 20th century? We're reading the NRSV. The English translation from the 20th century, can we peer back through that, or even more appropriate, listen back through that, all the way back to Jesus telling the story? And do we think that Jesus, in telling it, meant to use a term, a lifetime of wage, that would evoke the journey of one's life, the stewardship of all the moments in one's life? Is that intentional? And if I get a vote on that, I'd say I think it is. I think it's too specific a use of a phrase in the story that it's meant to evoke a lifetime of wage. It's also a large sum of money as opposed to a little sum of money, which changes the nature of the story. I might let my grandchildren have fun managing $5, maybe even, if they were working as a team 10. But I'd never give them $50,000 to manage. So I think it is intentional.
What do you think, John? Don, what does this particular part of the conversation tell us about the relationship between the giver and the receiver?
I think a reminder, which is reflected beyond this into the letters of all things are God's, all things created by God, through God, all that. It's almost like that's what many people would read before they read the story of the denarius and the temple. Remember, in the beginning? I think that has to overshape that. Sarah, you've got me thinking about that relationship, and I think that we all have the potential and the desire to evade. And we have the giver who I'd say has an expectation, understands what can be done, but there's a lot of promise in this. It's kind of a now scripture. There's work to be done now, and so I think we should all see ourselves as the evader, because I do believe it's in everyone's heart. If something bad happens, what do you want to do? Sometimes run away. Sometimes. So if you're doing list management in a class, and I know a lot of folks listen to this or preparing to moderate a class or have a discussion group, put up on your dry board or on your flip chart, other words used for this to make it connect to today and the relationship with the giver. And I came up with some words: sideline, evade, opt out, back out, sick day, play hooky, I'll take a pass, stand down, off the grid. In our discussion before we recorded, Sarah Mickelson, you said punt, using a sports metaphor. Those all seem familiar. I think if you had a class, you could probably fill up a whole blackboard with it, a whole whiteboard with it. We all know exactly what that is, and we have so many colloquialisms to describe it. It's in our hearts. This is something that makes us human, the desire to run away. And I did some research with CEOs and elected officials a few years ago, over 250. And without being asked, they all volunteered the fact that in a pinch, they probably would want to evade under certain circumstances. So I think we need to embrace that person and not be a critic. I don't think we're being a critic of it, but it's in my heart, just play out the fact pattern. So I think the relationship with the giver is there's the promise that the imagination, the promise for action now, the promise that if we are vigilant, if we see, if we look, in Matthew it's like, see? Jesus is like, see these people. Look what they're doing. Watch this. Jesus is watching people. Watch like me. You'll know what to do. You'll know what to do. At some level, some impact. And I'm thinking back to Zacchaeus. Oh, great, Zacchaeus says, I'm coming with you. I figured it out. And Jesus goes, no, go do it properly. Go do it properly. All these people work for you. There's a better way, a more excellent way to do these things. Use your brain. Look around. Do what's proper. Treat people fairly. That's it. There's an exponential impact there as well. But I would really look forward to hearing from some of our listeners about, if you did list management, I'd like to know the other 500 words that we use to talk about evasion and those kind of lost opportunities. That's what I've got, Sarah.
Thank you. I'll let that fold. I'm going to fold. I'm going to pass. I'm just going to give it a pass. So it's interesting to me that the giver entrusts this, whatever the talents are, to the receivers. Trust is an interesting challenge, right? This is a large sum of money, and you'd have to feel fairly confident that this person could protect this amount of money, or that they had some sort of actionable skill that would allow them to do something wonderful with this talent. So there's this level of trust and understanding that the giver might have about the receivers. It's interesting because I remember being offered something similar to this and being told, just make something. Just do something with it. Take an action with it. When I was a younger child and somebody said to me, I'm going to give you some money, I want to see what you're going to do with it. And I was like, okay. And it was interesting on what could I have done with it versus what I did do with it. And if your sense of relationship to the giver is not positive and is negative, as the third individual expounds, I'm wondering about what that limits you to do. And I'm thinking as a parent when I'm raising kids, and the language I use, do my children know that I'm going to stand with them, or do they fear that I'm going to judge what they're doing all the time? And as a parent, it's important to do that if they're doing something dangerous, if they're doing something that could be threatening to them. Or if they're doing something that's hurtful to the dynamic of the family, you might be adjudicating behavior. But for the most part, it's about teaching them how to fly. It's about teaching them how to become independent, how to become that person who will reach for potential instead of a person that will feel squashed by the world and never reach potential. So I'm reflecting on all of those things, and I'm thinking about how valuable it is to have a relationship with the giver. And in that relationship are the, if you will, scaffolding elements that would enable you to do something dynamic versus not taking any action at all. And that led me down a different path or entreated me to consider the building of a relationship with the person that gives you everything. And falling back on my favorite Bible passage, which is the earth is the Lord's and everything therein, it makes me think about the value of understanding the giver of all things a little differently than I feel my giver is adjudicating me or is going to be judgmental, then I'm less likely to take action because I'm afraid. And it makes me think about those conversations that start with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And almost all of them are bad conversations when they start with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Unless it's, we're going to do this together, here are the things we should be watchful for, as in, we're preparing for a hurricane to come ashore in Tampa, Florida, and what are those things we should be watchful for as indicators for when to take the next action? I'm thinking about building punch lists. I'm thinking about completing tasks. I'm thinking about moving toward something that might be safer versus something that would be unsafe. So in those cases, I think it's interesting to watch how fear, uncertainty, and doubt works on the decision-making process and who poses that fear and uncertainty and doubt. It's a marketing ploy, the help I've fallen and I can't get up approach. And so I'm always cautious when I see that particular marketing approach used in conversation, because it usually means somebody's trying to get me to take an action based on fear. And that is counter to this story a little bit, to me. So that leads me to my third question. Well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your master. Faithfulness seems to be the multiplier in this story. How does faithfulness work in this story, and how does the receiver of one talent demonstrate, or not, faithfulness? What are your thoughts, John?
Sarah, can I start by talking about what you just finished with and say, the question about where this master is coming from, does he trust, and you have to trust these givers. I start by saying, yes, I mean, he does give them the money, but also no, right, because he diversifies his portfolio. He doesn't trust any one of them, enough to give it all to any one of them. But maybe his motives are different. Maybe he wants them each to have a shot at it, But assuming that he isn't, working for their good in some way, he diversifies his portfolio, even as he trusts them as a group. And that pulls into a really important question with respect to this parable is the master the paradigm of, divine behavior, or is the master not, the paradigm for divine behavior? So you pulled me into that further with your fine reflection on that. And with respect to faithfulness in this story, there's definitely an emotional part of my faith and my understanding that's really pulling for the steward who has the least who buries it. I want to say, hey, this guy's trying to be faithful too. Let's acknowledge the faithfulness of the one who's afraid. I just think that's where a lot of people are in the world, and at times certainly me too, that we're afraid and we're trying to be faithful. I think this steward does what he does. So see, if you don't see the master simply as the good ideal of this story, you might start to create a little space to have empathy for this third steward, not suggesting he's the paradigm for best behavior. But by golly, I think he is a paradigm for us, or at least a big part of us, and it's not all bad. He is responding in fear, and I think we know what that is like. I have a heart for him, and he doesn't go out and then just spend the money frivolously. So there are things he could have done that would have been worse. Now that's me projecting my values onto the money and onto the person there. But I think that the third person is also a study in faithfulness under pressure and faithfulness in the face of fear. And if we don't see the master as a paradigm of God, then we, I think, have more space to not judge his response to the third steward who buried it as God's judgment. So there's a scholar that you may have encountered named William Herzog who says, yes, we've got this parable all wrong. We keep seeing God as the master in this story, and that's not where early Christians would have been. And so that, I think, opens my heart a bit to the third steward too. Now, I don't think he's the paradigm of faithfulness, but I do think he's an honest story of probably where we are more often than with the other two stewards in the story.
I will say that there's some conversation specifically about usury for people in the time of Jesus' lifespan who would have remembered the instructions from the Leviticus that it directed them not to do anything with usury and how to multiply money. So the conversation about the first two might have been more objectionable than what the third receiver did. So I'm curious about that. I'm thinking about, I'm also laying this against the backdrop of the economic upheaval that we went through not too long ago, and how there was a lot of money on the sidelines with people who had wealth that didn't move it into the marketplace and take any action out of fear. And the dynamic problem that occurred as a result of that was that liquidity in the economic marketplace wasn't there, and it kept the economy from expanding. So I'm curious about how that dynamic works against the backdrop of maybe that's part of what makes this system more valuable to all parties, is having some that have the courage to move forward with investment and some that are reticent and hold back. So I'm still thinking about that. Faithfulness for me also means, how am I applying what I'm given within the circle of people I normally navigate? Am I helping? Am I observing and not participating? Am I in dialogue with them? And am I aware of what's going on in their world? And am I moving with them toward a positive versus moving with them toward a negative, and figuring out what I can do to make their lives less difficult? And it's like kindness. Yesterday was National Kindness Day, which I thought was a wonderful thought. The idea of, as you come alongside someone, if you come with kindness, it changes the perspective a little bit. And I see this often with my son. If I approach with a harsh tone and a difficult point, he's less likely to bend toward me and more likely to bend away, or I should say, take no action. So it's a conversation about feeling safe. It's a conversation about feeling seen. It's a conversation about feeling heard. It's a conversation about working with the community or the enterprise where you are employed, or what you're doing in your family structures, that can accelerate kindness or it can decelerate kindness. So I'm thinking about faithfulness in the sense that it becomes that energy that moves things forward. Don, what do you think?
Well, I love the question, faithfulness. I'll say there's something static about saying good and faithful servant as if it is finished. And, to distort good English, I think it's about faithful-ing, put an ing on it. Are you faithful-ing your life? Because this is just active. It's a state of change. It's moving forward. So I think it's not about being a rival. It's you're faithful-ing in everything that you do to distort the language. I had a couple questions that came up. I know they probably can't be answered today, but one is, John, you made me think about this in your comments. It's not. I wonder if it's important that this parable makes it very clear that it wasn't protected; it was lessened by inaction. That there's a line where it's like no harm was done, and I feel like the parable points out harm was done. If there was an option to protect, put it in the soil and let it be, I don't think that's I think the message is it's negative equity. It's not that I protect. It's like all things in it, in the world, all things created, all things given are lesser because of you. So it's not. It went to zero, or it's the same as it was. It's not. It's less. And I'll throw that out for comments if you like when I go through this. But I'm just curious how important that is. It's not. I'm not any worse off. The world and all that's in it is worse off. It's negative equity. So I'm just curious about your folks' thought on that. And I was also thinking about portfolio managers today and venture capitalists, and we always jump to 10x, 12x return, and you exit and you make money. It's like that's actually not how it works. So, Sarah, all this is a bit about tangibility in the 21st, 22nd century and that. But portfolio managers have to, and I have a chance to talk with them, and the what, the analysis, the imagination for them really matters. The what, the why, the how, the dynamics, changing markets. It's all faithfully through what they're doing with that portfolio. It's not like if I put money here, we're going to have 10x return. It's not it at all. The intimacy with what needs to be done, the understanding, the hard work, the insights, the seeing. And it's so amazing, kind of going back to transformation of a piece of silver in the earth turned into a coin or whatever the transformation is. When it really works out well for a portfolio manager, you know what they call it? If it's over 10x, it's a mystical creature. They call it a unicorn. But what the portfolio manager does with the workforce, the idea, the patent, how it's activated, the faithfulling, there's not even a real creature that can describe how transformed it is. It's not a horse. It's not a goat. It's not a piece of silver. It's a unicorn. And that is actually a global statement about the transformation that takes place. So, going along with Jesus saying, consider investments, that's how far it could go. In terms of faithfully, going back to the scriptures, I commend to you punting and taking a pass. Moses, no thank you. No thank you. I commend to you, Jonah, not only no thank you, but you're not doing it the way I think you should. I know what should be done at Nineveh. You're not going to do it my way. I know the mind of God. No thank you. Here's human beings all through Scripture. No thank you. But I think with Jonah, there's the idea of I know better. I know the mind of God, or I fear God. Therefore, I'm going to create negative equity. Jonah's and he's even mad at the end of that book, right? He's like, he didn't do it my way. I think there's a connection here with thinking we know the mind of God when our job is to activate these things. So, what is it in terms of faithfulness? I think faithfulness is, for any portfolio manager, in faithfully, we have a job to evaluate, to see, a line of sight, a field of vision. Look, engage, see. You'll know what to do. You'll know what to do. Know the ecosystem with which we're dealing. Understand what you're asked to do. And if you don't invest, I think there's something really intimate about our lives. If you don't engage in that kind of faithfulling, that transformation, that unicorns are real, that kind of thing, you don't see the world. You're not alive. All things are God's and all things in it, and you can create negative equity. But if you don't do it, you're not really engaging. Someone said, you're not alive. Aren't you living? Don't you see? No, thank you. It's like, I think this is taking a pass on. It ain't living. I think years ago, and that ain't living. If you try it, you work, you're going to see the people, you're going to see what can take place, and you can use your head, John, to your point, as a part of the bigger portfolio. And I don't feel intimidated anymore. I used to about, that's a lot of responsibility, but in portfolio management, the way Jesus is saying it is, there's a piece for you. There's a job for you. There might be 20 million people doing faithfully, but there's promise in what you can do. You can get your little head up, get your noggin up, look and meditate on what's going on, and that's the discipline of life. So that's what I've got, and I see we have 2-3 minutes left just in case there's any follow-ups needed. So let's go back around and see if there's any tidying up or new ideas, folks. John, anything from you?
Well, I let me see if I can say 3 things. One is to say, I do think that this story is a story Jesus gave us, as Matthew remembers it, that encourages us to be, I don't want to say risk-taking, but I do think it calls for us to be making good use of every opportunity. It calls for us to be making good use of even the smallest or the largest opportunity. I think the story is teaching us that. The second thing I want to say is I think that we have to be careful not to just simply assume as a master is the God figure in the story. This line, in verse 29, this the master speaking. It's a part of what the master says at the end. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. One of the fellows in the church I shared as we were looking at the text yesterday turned and said to me at the end of that, well, that's not the gospel. He said, that's just the rich get richer. He's right. And so I think we have to be careful not to just assume that the master is God, because he's not talking like Jesus said the character of God was, in terms of what he's saying there. And then the third thing I'd say is there's 2 phrases, at least from this text, that the church has pulled out liturgically and also in practical use, all right, that oftentimes, I think, across history, people don't realize are coming from this story. The first is the line in the first verse 15. To each one according to his ability. To each according to their ability. If you quote that to folks, I think a good number of them would say, yeah, that's in the Bible somewhere. But I'm not sure. But it's this parables where it's coming from. To each, you could do a whole Sunday school class just on that phrase. To each according to his ability. Do we believe that? Do we think that's gospel? What is that teaching us? And the second phrase is more liturgically used, and it's the line that says, well done, good and trustworthy servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many. Enter into the joy of your master. That's used in memorial and funeral services a lot. And it's even condensed into, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master across denominations, across traditions. And people don't always, and perhaps often, remember that's being drawn from this story. And we do hear that, and we do tend to think, oh, that's gospel. That's the good news, isn't it? But it's coming from the mouth of the master in this parable. And so I'm going to keep using it, but we should be careful in our listening to it to be sure we're hearing it in the context of gospel.
Thank you. Sarah, any last words for us today?
It's a Wonderful Life by Frank Capra. I recommend that because I think it speaks to the way we invest in each other. and the way we might not. It depends on whether you follow Mr. Potter or you follow the Bailey Savings and Loan. So for me, that's a holiday favorite to watch, but it also speaks to the value of a life well invested. And then we get to see that played out when Clarence and the young Bailey explore his life and what it would have been like had he not been in the right place at the right time so many times to help those around him. And I think we often fail to see how the small encouragement, the presence alongside, the statement of belief or faith in each other can be the ingredient, the single one ingredient that might be a straw that tips the, if you will, proverbial camel in the right direction. So I commend that to you with high recommendation as we look toward Advent.
Thank you, Sarah. And one thing just came to mind, and this would be my thinking for the day. I'm thinking about no thank you or taking a pass. And now the echo of Jesus in the garden is coming to me. Riding through the gate, even. He's going to ride through no matter what. So this is that Christ who will be facing the rest and trial going forward, and says, in one of the Gospels, if this cup can pass from me. There's no thank you in that. Well, for folks listening in, Palmacia Presbyterian Church, that makes this podcast possible, is at 3501 West San Jose in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. We always commend that site to you because, well, there's John Debevoise and his fine sermons. Prayers, other pastors and sermons, outstanding music, meditations, discussions of lectionary, disagreements about lectionary, and many more things. So we always commend that site to you. I hope I get that right, John, since we have the senior pastor with us. Is that a fair view of what's there?
It's certainly been my experience, Don, but in humility, it makes me somewhat embarrassed to hear you say it, but I appreciate your saying it. I'll tell you, I'm very grateful to be a part of that good and gracious community, and I'm very grateful through the ministry of this podcast to be connected with many good communities of faith and approaching the Scripture.
Thank you. And I have good news. I may double check on this. You'll see this done live. John Debevoise, we are assuming you're going to be with us again next week. Is that true?
Yeah, to quote Nathan to David, I am the man. Thou art the man.
So you enjoy having John as a part of this team. We don't operate without a net. I speak for my fellow layperson, Sarah Nicholson. We only do this on condition there's a seminarian or pastor with us. So John is also our safety net. So you'll get John next week with another great passage. So we look forward to that, and you're always welcome. And we will see you next time.